Eliza was auctioned, her soul sold to a ruthless predator for debt. "Then let me pay with eternity," the wild mountain man growled, stepping forward. The entire town held its breath as Silas Croft, frozen by the stranger's chilling resolve and a cryptic detail, suddenly retreated. What terrifying promise made him abandon his prize, sending Eliza towards an unknown destiny? Eliza was a woman forged in the crucible of this land, her spirit as sturdy as the gnarled oaks that clung to the riverbanks. She knew the bite of winter winds and the scorching breath of summer, the relentless demands of a life lived on the edge of civilization. Yet, no amount of frontier toughness could shield her from the fate that now coiled around her, tightening its grip with each passing hour. Her father, a man whose good intentions were as fleeting as his luck at the card table, had signed away her future, a contract etched in his own despair, binding Eliza to a man whose very name cast a pall over the entire valley. Silas Croft was that man, a titan of industry and avarice, whose wealth was said to be as deep and dark as the mines he owned. He saw the world, and indeed the people within it, as mere pawns in his grand, calculating game of power. Dry Creek, with its struggling inhabitants and its fragile hopes, was simply another board upon which he played. He was not a man to forgive a debt, nor to forget a slight. And now he had come for Eliza. The transaction was to unfold on the weathered porch of the town's only tavern, a stage deliberately set for public humiliation. It was a grim spectacle, a stark warning to any who dared to cross Silas Croft or who faltered in their obligations. The air hung heavy, thick with the scent of pine and stale beer, dust swirling in the occasional listless breeze. Eliza stood tall, her shoulders squared, a quiet defiance warring with the profound terror that flickered in the depths of her eyes. Her calico dress, though clean, seemed to mock the grandeur of the day's dark business, a simple garment for a life about to be stripped bare. From the dim recesses of the boardwalks and the shadowed doorways of shops, the townsfolk watched. Their faces were masks of fear and a chilling complicity. Their consciences undoubtedly heavy, yet their bodies remained rooted, paralyzed by the icy grip of Croft's authority. No one dared to speak. No one dared to intervene. The silence was absolute, broken only by the mournful creak of the tavern sign and the distant, lonely call of a hawk circling high above. It was a silence that spoke volumes, a testament to the suffocating fear that ruled Dry Creek, a fear that had choked the very heart out of its people. They had surrendered their own freedoms, piece by piece, until only a hollow shell remained, and Eliza was now to be the ultimate visible sacrifice. She often wondered if there was any true goodness left in this place, any spark of courage that had not been extinguished by the relentless pressure of men like Croft. She looked at their downcast eyes, their hunched shoulders, and saw not just fear, but a deeper, more troubling resignation, a collective acceptance of their own subjugation. Then the oppressive silence seemed to shift, not broken by a sound, but by a palpable presence. A subtle change in the light, a fleeting shadow that stretched across the dusty street, distinct from the long, thin tendrils cast by the sparse trees. It was a disturbance, a ripple in the stillness, as if the mountain itself had exhaled, sending forth something ancient and watchful into the quiet despair of the valley. A tension, hitherto focused solely on Eliza and Croft, now expanded, stretching towards an unknown, an inevitable shift in the very fabric of that grim morning. The shadow detached itself from the harsh line where the trees met the dust, moving with a fluid, untamed grace that was utterly alien to the stilted, fearful energy of the village. It was Jonas Bear Grimm, the mountain man, a name whispered more often than spoken, a figure of legend and solitude. To the people of Dry Creek, he was a wraith, a spectral presence that belonged to the untamed wilderness, not to their small, struggling pocket of civilization. He was a man who had long ago traded the company of men for the silent communion of granite and pine, whose life was etched into the harsh lines of the peaks, as wild and uncompromising as the land itself. His descent into the heart of the street was deliberate, unhurried, yet held an undeniable, potent force. His eyes, the color of glacial ice, unblinking and clear, were not fixed on the imposing figure of Silas Croft, nor on the faces of the terrified townsfolk. Instead, they found Eliza, standing amidst her public degradation, her quiet dignity a stark contrast to the ugliness unfolding around her. In her eyes he saw not just fear, but a flicker of a spirit unbroken, a defiance that resonated deep within his own solitary code. He saw the cold, transactional cruelty the civilized world was about to inflict, and something ancient and unyielding stirred within him, a primal instinct for justice that transcended the meager laws of men. Jonas Grimm stopped, not directly in front of Eliza, but precisely between her and Croft, a silent, powerful barrier. The very air around them seemed to crackle with an unspoken tension, two worlds colliding in a vortex of conflicting wills. Croft, a man accustomed to absolute deference, bristled at the interruption, his face contorting into a mask of irritation. He barked for the wild man to step aside, asserting his rightful claim, reiterating that the woman was legally his, bought and paid for, the contract a testament to his undeniable ownership. His voice was a snarl, laced with the casual cruelty of one who wielded unchecked power. It was then that the mountain man spoke, his voice a low rumble, deep as the earth and resonant as stones shifting in a hidden creek. He simply asked the price of the debt. Croft, taken aback by the sheer audacity of the question, threw back his head and laughed, a harsh, dismissive sound that scraped against the stillness. He mocked Grimm, scoffing at the notion that a man clad in the rough hides of the forest could ever hope to command such a sum. A man who lived off the land, far from the trappings of wealth, could not possibly understand the true cost of things, or so Croft believed. He saw only a wild animal, not a man. But Jonas Grimm did not flinch, his gaze unwavering. He turned slightly, his ice-blue eyes meeting Eliza's, and in that brief, profound connection, he saw not a possession, but a person, a soul on the brink. Then, in a gesture that seemed to draw the very breath from the world, he spoke again, his words delivered with the weight of mountains. If the debt demanded a groom, he declared, and a payment, then he would be the guarantor. He would pay not with coin, but with a promise that stretched beyond the understanding of any man in that town. He would pay, he vowed, with eternity. A terrible, suffocating impasse settled over Dry Creek. Silas Croft, a man who understood the sharp edges of gold, the cold steel of weapons, and the paralyzing grip of fear, was utterly bewildered. He possessed no ledger entry for such an abstract currency, no measure for a promise so vast. He stared into Grimm's eyes, searching for madness, for weakness, but found only an absolute unyielding resolution. It was a silent declaration, a promise that to attempt to seize Eliza would ignite a violence that even Croft, in all his power, could not contain. There was a raw, untamed danger radiating from the mountain man, a force of nature that defied all his carefully constructed rules. A cold, quiet rage simmered beneath Grimm's stillness, a warning of the savage price that would be paid if Croft dared to cross this line. It was not a threat, it was a simple, undeniable fact. With a guttural growl, a sound of frustrated fury, the land baron tore the contract into pieces, the scraps of paper fluttering to the dusty ground like discarded dreams. He spat, the words venomous, declaring that she was not worth the war against a ghost. He retreated, his defeat palpable, a bitter taste in his mouth, not from a loss of wealth but from a confrontation with a conviction so profound it rendered his own power meaningless. Jonas Bear Grimm spoke no more words. He simply extended a calloused hand towards Eliza, his palm open, a silent invitation. She, looking into his steady, unfathomable gaze, saw not a new master, not another chain, but an unexpected, defiant salvation. It was a hand that promised not a gilded cage, but the boundless freedom of the wild. And without a moment's hesitation, she accepted. The touch of his rough skin against hers was surprisingly gentle, a spark of warmth in a world grown cold. Together, the two outcasts, the woman sold by a society that had cast her aside and the man who had long abandoned that same society, turned their backs on the silent, watching town of Dry Creek. They began the long, arduous climb towards the mountains, towards a future as uncertain as it was liberating. The eternity he had promised was not a prison, but an infinite horizon, a vast expanse of possibility where the rules of men held no sway. In the formidable refuge of the wilderness, he would offer her not just safety, but would slowly unveil the latent strength she already possessed, a strength that had been stifled by the world below. And she, in turn, unknowingly held the key to mending the deep, echoing solitude that he had carried for so many desolate years. The first breath of mountain air was different, purer, carrying the scent of pine and untamed promise. As she looked back, Dry Creek, with its whispers and its fears, already seemed to shrink, fading into an insignificant speck below. The path ahead was steep, but for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Eliza felt truly free. The ascent was a silent testament to the vast difference between their two worlds. Eliza, though accustomed to hardship, felt the pull of the mountain's incline in every protesting muscle. Jonas, however, moved with an effortless grace as if the steep, rocky terrain were an extension of his own being. The air grew thinner, crisper, carrying the sharp scent of pine and the clean, cold breath of elevation. Dry Creek, with its dust and its desperate whispers, dwindled to an insignificant stain on the valley floor, eventually vanishing entirely behind a rising ridge. They walked for hours, the only sounds the crunch of their boots on loose rock and the steady, rhythmic drumming of Eliza's own heart. She stole glances at the silent man beside her, a figure of raw power and quiet mystery, wondering about the life he led, the world he inhabited. As dusk began to paint the sky in hues of purple and deep orange, a faint wisp of smoke curled upwards from a distant stand of ancient pines. It was a beacon, subtle and almost imperceptible, a sign of human presence in a landscape that otherwise felt utterly devoid of it. Soon, a clearing emerged, nestled in a small, sheltered basin, dominated by a sturdy cabin built of rough-hewn logs. This was his sanctuary, his silent fortress against the world. It was a place where human ingenuity met the raw power of nature, a testament to resilience and self-reliance. The cabin was modest, yet powerfully built, its thick walls and stone chimney speaking of countless winters endured. Around it the wilderness pressed in, vast and indifferent. This was Eliza's new world, stark and uncompromising. The scent of wood smoke was strong here, a comforting warmth against the growing mountain chill. Inside, the cabin was Spartan, but meticulously ordered. Tools hung on pegs. Furs lay neatly stacked. A rifle rested against the stone hearth. The only light came from the embers glowing in the fireplace, casting dancing shadows that made the familiar unfamiliar. The initial interaction between them was a delicate dance of tension and unspoken necessity. He was a recluse, a man who had chosen solitude, his silence a language she was only just beginning to learn. She was a refugee, her survival now tied to the generosity of a stranger. He moved with a quiet efficiency, tending the fire, preparing a simple meal of dried meat and hardtack. He offered her a mug of hot herbal tea, its warmth seeping into her chilled hands. A small gesture of welcome in a landscape that offered little comfort. Eliza felt the weight of his hesitation, the subtle barrier he maintained. His world, ordered and solitary, was a carefully constructed haven, and her unexpected arrival was an intrusion, no matter how necessary. He did not speak of the debt, nor of the bargain. He spoke only of the cold, the need for warmth, and the rhythm of mountain life. She understood instinctively that his hospitality was not born of charity, but of a deeper, unspoken code. It was a quiet assessment, a testing of her spirit. He watched her, not with suspicion, but with a keen, observing eye, gauging her resilience, her capacity for this new, harsh existence. As the night deepened, the wind began to whisper tales through the pines, a wild, untamed melody that was both haunting and beautiful. Inside, the cabin felt like a small, fragile bubble of warmth against the vast, indifferent darkness of the mountain. Eliza noticed a worn, leather-bound journal tucked beneath a stack of maps on a rough-hewn table. Its cover was smooth with age, and a faint, almost imperceptible design was embossed into the leather, a series of interlocking symbols that seemed familiar, yet she couldn't place them. It was a small detail, easily overlooked, but it suggested a hidden depth to the quiet mountain man, a life lived before the wild, a history that might yet intertwine with her own. He looked at her then, his gaze direct and piercing. He had saved her from one kind of slavery, but the mountain itself demanded its own kind of service. His voice, when it came, was low and steady, lacking any softness, yet devoid of malice. He did not offer comfort. He offered sanctuary. But sanctuary, he made clear, came with a price, not in coin, but in adherence to the unyielding laws of that wild place. She was welcome to stay, to find refuge from the world that had cast her out. But in return, the mountain expected work, the cabin expected care, and he expected a profound respect for the solitary rhythms of his existence. He did not offer her a soft bed of roses, but a hard-won peace in exchange for her usefulness, her strength, and her unwavering understanding that in this untamed realm, both were essential for survival. The bargain was struck, not with words of affection, but with the stark, clear truth of the mountains. The days that followed blurred into a rhythm of arduous labor and quiet discovery. Eliza, despite her apprehension, found a dormant strength within herself. The mountain offered no pity, only raw, unyielding demands, and she met them with a resolve born of necessity. Jonas, true to his nature, was a silent teacher, demonstrating the intricacies of survival without a single wasted word. He showed her how to split firewood, the axe biting deep into the seasoned logs with a satisfying thud, the sharp scent of pine filling the crisp air. She learned to mend worn gear, to set snares, to identify edible plants amidst the dense undergrowth, and to discern the subtle signs of changing weather in the sky. Each task was a lesson, each successful effort a small victory that slowly eroded her self-doubt. She learned to carry heavy water buckets from the icy stream, her muscles aching but her spirit growing firmer. She mastered the art of tending the small garden patch, coaxing life from the stubborn mountain soil. The first time she successfully started a fire using flint and steel, the sparks catching onto the tinder with a faint crackle. A quiet sense of triumph swelled within her, unnoticed by Jonas but deeply felt. She was not merely surviving. She was learning to thrive in a way she never had in the constrained world of Dry Creek. Her hands, once accustomed to finer stitches, now grew calloused and strong, mirroring the burgeoning resilience in her heart. Jonas watched her, his observations keen but always discreet. He saw the steady determination in her eyes, the tireless effort she poured into every task. Gradually, the initial tension between them began to soften, replaced by a nascent respect, a silent acknowledgement of shared purpose. She cooked the simple meals, adding a touch of flavor with wild herbs she now recognized. She mended his worn clothing with surprising skill, her nimble fingers transforming torn cloth into durable garments. The cabin, once merely a shelter, slowly began to transform under her quiet care. The harsh edges softened. A splash of color appeared from a wild bouquet placed on the table. The lingering scent of wood smoke now mingled with the comforting aroma of fresh-baked bread, a luxury Jonas had long forgotten. Her touch, a gentle domesticity, started to weave itself into the very fabric of his solitary existence. She began to turn the stark functional structure of survival into something more akin to a home. It was not strength of limb, though she was strong, but a deeper, more profound resilience that was slowly revealing itself. Her knowledge of medicinal herbs, learned at her grandmother's knee, proved invaluable when Jonas suffered a deep gash while felling a tree. Her calm hands and steady remedies brought him relief, a silent demonstration of a different kind of power, a healing touch he had long denied himself. One particularly bitter evening, as a sudden, brutal blizzard descended upon the mountain, trapping them within the confines of the cabin, a small revelation occurred. The storm howled like a hungry wolf, shaking the very foundations of their refuge. Jonas, preoccupied with securing the windows and reinforcing the door against the onslaught, had forgotten to retrieve a fresh stack of firewood. As the fire dwindled to embers and the chill began to seep into the cabin, Eliza, without a word, donned her heaviest cloak. She ventured out into the swirling snow, returning moments later, laden with armfuls of dry logs she had carefully stacked and covered near the shed earlier that day. Her foresight, a quiet act of preparation, saved them from a night of frigid discomfort. Jonas merely nodded, a flicker of something akin to admiration in his eyes. He had underestimated her, seeing only a refugee, not a partner. This quiet, steady progress, however, was about to face a brutal interruption. The mountain, though vast, was not an impenetrable shield against all forms of intrusion. Deep within her heart, Eliza knew that the world below, the world she had fled, still held a lingering claim. And as a faint, distant howl echoed through the swirling snow, not the call of a wolf but something more chillingly human, she felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. It was a sound that heralded the arrival of a new obstacle, a challenge that threatened to unravel all the fragile peace she had painstakingly built, a chilling reminder that the past, no matter how far, always found a way to follow. The mountain's harsh beauty was often underscored by its brutal indifference, a truth that resonated deeply one late autumn afternoon. A hunting trip, meant to replenish their dwindling stores, turned into a terrifying ordeal. Jonas, usually as silent and agile as a ghost in the forest, had been caught in a rockfall. A sharp crack, followed by the sickening slide of earth and stone, had pinned his leg beneath a massive boulder. His raw grunt of pain echoed through the silent woods, a sound of pure agony that chilled Eliza to the bone. She found him hours later, caught in a shallow ravine, his face ashen, his leg trapped and twisted at an unnatural angle. The air hung heavy with the scent of damp earth and pine, now mingled with the metallic tang of blood. The light was fading fast, the mountain preparing to swallow them whole in its icy embrace. Panic, a cold serpent, tried to coil around her heart, but Eliza fought it back with a fierce resolve. She knew that Jonas, for all his strength, was vulnerable, his survival now dependent entirely on her. His traditional methods, his raw power, were useless against the unyielding stone. She assessed the situation with a clarity born of desperation. The boulder was too heavy to move by brute force. His leg, already swelling, was clearly broken. There was no time to fetch help. The night would bring freezing temperatures and perhaps predators drawn by the scent of blood. Her eyes scanned the surrounding area, searching for anything, any small advantage the wilderness might offer. She remembered a story her grandfather, a stubborn old farmer, used to tell about leverage, about moving heavy objects with simple tools. A thick, fallen tree trunk lay nearby, partially buried in the mossy earth. With frantic energy, she began to dig away the soil around one end, pushing it towards the trapped boulder. Using smaller rocks as fulcrums, she painstakingly maneuvered the heavy trunk, grunting with effort, her hands raw and bleeding. Slowly, inch by agonizing inch, she wedged the trunk beneath the edge of the boulder, using it as a lever. The strain was immense, her muscles screaming with protest. But she pushed through the pain, imagining the quiet strength of the pines, the relentless flow of the river. With one final desperate heave, the boulder shifted, groaning against the earth just enough to free Jonas's leg. A gasp of relief escaped his lips, a rare sound of vulnerability from the usually stoic man. She helped him, supporting his heavy frame, slowly, painfully, back to the cabin. The journey was long, punctuated by his grunts of pain and her own whispered words of encouragement. Back in the cabin, the crisis was far from over. His leg needed to be set, and he needed care that extended beyond the rudimentary. With steady hands, guided by instinct and the distant memory of her grandmother's remedies, Eliza cleaned the wound, carefully straightened the limb, and fashioned a splint from sturdy branches and strips of canvas. She brewed a potent pain-relieving tea from wild willow bark, forcing it past his gritted teeth. For days and nights she barely slept, tending to him, changing dressings, keeping the fire burning. her exhaustion pushed aside by an unwavering devotion. As the fever finally broke and Jonas began the slow, arduous process of healing, the rigid emotional barriers between them began to crack. The silent, stoic mountain man was forced to rely entirely on her, a profound shift in their dynamic. One evening, as the fire cast long, dancing shadows on the cabin walls, Jonas, his voice hoarse, spoke of his past. He spoke of a family lost to a brutal raid, of the gnawing grief that had driven him to abandon mankind, to seek solace in the unforgiving embrace of the mountains. He confessed his loneliness, a raw, aching wound he had carried for years, buried deep beneath layers of solitude and self-imposed isolation. In turn, Eliza, her own voice barely a whisper, shared her story. She spoke of her mother's early death, of a father consumed by his failures and his addiction, of the crushing weight of expectation and neglect. She spoke of the fear, the constant threat of destitution, and the ultimate betrayal of being sold. Her own abandonment, she realized now, had been a different kind of wilderness, one that left scars on the soul rather than the skin. In the quiet honesty of that exchange, a profound understanding bloomed between them. They were two outcasts, both bearing the invisible wounds of a world that had failed them, now finding a shared sanctuary, not just in the cabin, but in each other's presence. They had both carried a heavy weight, and now, finally, they had found someone to share the burden. Yet, this fragile new bond was not without its own immediate consequence. Jonas, still weakened and confined to the cabin, looked at her with an intensity she hadn't seen before. His eyes, usually distant, were now sharp with concern. He knew the risk she had taken for him, the danger she had faced alone. His survival now connected them in a way neither had anticipated. His gaze shifted to the crude splint on his leg, then back to her, a silent recognition of her indispensable role in his life. The world beyond their cabin, though silent now under the watchful stars, still held its dangers. And he, crippled and vulnerable, could no longer be her sole protector. He knew with a certainty that settled deep in his bones that their intertwined destinies had just taken a perilous, unforeseen turn. With Jonas slowly healing, a period of quiet shared existence settled upon the mountain cabin. The frantic urgency of survival began to recede, allowing a different kind of life to bloom. Eliza continued her work, her movements now imbued with a quiet confidence that came from knowing her efforts were not just for survival, but for a shared home. She prepared hearty meals, her laughter, once a rare and fragile sound, now occasionally echoing through the small space. She began to mend old books, forgotten treasures Jonas had brought from his previous life, her fingers tracing the faded words, bringing stories back to life. Jonas, though still recovering, found himself drawn into her quiet world. He watched her, no longer with the objective eye of a survivalist, but with a growing warmth that softened the harsh lines of his face. They would spend evenings by the roaring fire, the only light in the vast mountain darkness, sharing stories. He spoke of the mountain's hidden trails, of the secret places where game abounded, of the ancient spirits said to dwell among the highest peaks. She, in turn, described the bustling markets of her youth, the vibrant colors of town dresses, the distant, forgotten melodies of old folk songs. Their words, exchanged in the intimate glow of the flames, wove a new tapestry, binding their disparate pasts into a shared present. The connection between them deepened with each passing day, a quiet, unspoken understanding that transcended words. It was built on gestures, his offering her the warmest fur blanket on a cold night, her leaving him a steaming mug of tea by his bedside each morning. There was a gentle touch of his hand on her arm as he passed, a lingering gaze that held more emotion than any spoken confession. The cabin, once a fortress of solitude, now vibrated with the subtle hum of companionship, of a shared breath. The harshness of their initial bargain, the cold exchange for sanctuary, had melted away, leaving behind the burgeoning warmth of genuine affection. One particularly clear day, as Eliza was mending a tear in one of Jonas's old, weathered hunting maps, she noticed a faint, familiar symbol sketched in the corner. It was a small, almost hidden mark, a stylized wolf's head with a crescent moon above it. Her breath caught in her throat. She had seen this symbol before, etched into a small silver locket her mother had worn, a family heirloom passed down for generations. Her mother had spoken of it as a symbol of protection, a link to their ancient, distant kin who had once lived in the shadow of the great mountains. She remembered her mother whispering tales of a secluded valley, a hidden community, but the stories had been vague, lost to time, and the pressures of their meager existence. With a trembling hand, she pointed to the symbol on the map. Jonas's eyes, usually so impassive, widened slightly. He explained that it was a marker, a sign left by an old mountain clan, a tribe known for their deep knowledge of the wilderness and their fierce independence. He had discovered it years ago, believing it to be a relic of a vanished people. But Eliza, holding the locket that day, knew differently. It was the same mark. Their destinies, it seemed, had been subtly intertwined long before the dust of Dry Creek brought them together. Her mother's family, those distant kin, had walked these very mountains, perhaps even in this very valley. The connection was undeniable, a powerful thread woven through generations, linking her to this place, to this man, in a way that felt like fate. It transformed their meeting from a random act of salvation into something far more profound, as if the mountains themselves had guided her back to her own ancestral home. But this newfound peace, this revelation of shared heritage, was destined to be abruptly shattered. As the first blush of winter began to paint the peaks with snow, a sense of unease settled over the valley. The forest grew quieter, unnaturally so. One morning, Jonas, returning from checking his traps, carried a grim expression. He held a small, crudely fashioned wooden bird, its wings broken, a piece of faded red ribbon tied to its leg. It was not his trap, nor his territory. He recognized the crude carving. It was a distinctive marker, a grim signature left by the very men who served Silas Croft, the men who had once sought to claim Eliza. The small, broken bird was a clear, undeniable sign. A chilling whisper carried on the wind. They had been found. The sanctuary of the mountain, their fragile, blossoming home, was no longer safe. The past, it seemed, had not forgotten its claim. The small, broken wooden bird, its red ribbon a stark slash against the pristine snow, felt like a thunderclap in the quiet sanctuary of their cabin. The peace, so carefully nurtured, so newly found, shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. Jonas's face, usually a mask of stoicism, was now etched with a grim determination, his eyes cold and hard as flint. Eliza felt a familiar, sickening dread coil in her stomach, the cold tendrils of her past reaching out, threatening to reclaim her. She was no longer a victim, no longer a helpless refugee. She was a fierce defender of the home they had built, and of the man who had given her a new life. Her fear was not for herself, but for the fragile happiness they had found. The mountain, once their refuge, now felt like a grand, silent arena where their battle was destined to play out. The primary force of opposition, Silas Croft and his ruthless men, were not just a vague threat anymore. They were a looming, undeniable presence, their shadows lengthening across the valley. They sought not merely to punish, but to reclaim what they considered their property, to enforce their distorted sense of justice. The broken bird was a clear message. They knew where she was, and they were coming for her. This time their objective was not to destroy the mountain man's sanctuary, but to pry Eliza from his protective grasp, to drag her back to the world of debt and ownership. Jonas, once a solitary hunter, now stood as her unyielding protector, a force of nature ready to defend his own. Days turned into a tense vigil. Jonas, still limping from his injury, moved with a renewed urgency, preparing for the inevitable confrontation. He fortified the cabin, checked his dwindling supply of traps, and sharpened his knives, the metallic rasp a constant reminder of the coming storm. Eliza, in turn, refused to be sidelined. She cleaned his rifle, melted lead for bullets, and prepared medicinal poultices, her hands steady, her mind focused. They worked in a silent, synchronized partnership, each understanding the gravity of the situation. the fight for their shared future. The first tangible sign of their approach came with the distant, intermittent glint of metal reflecting the sun from a lower ridge, followed by the faint, muffled sound of voices carried on the wind. They were closing in. Jonas studied his maps, his brow furrowed, trying to anticipate their approach. Croft was not just sending a few men. This was an organized effort, a calculated assault. He spoke of their numbers, their likely tactics, his words painting a grim picture of the odds against them. Then, a chilling revelation unfolded. As Jonas was scouting the perimeter, he discovered a small, intricately carved wooden figure, impaled on a tree near one of their game trails. A miniature wolf, much like Eliza's locket, but with a crude, mocking grin carved into its face. Attached to it was a small piece of parchment. It was a message, not from Croft, but from someone else, someone unexpected. The note, written in a shaky hand, spoke of the mountain curse and warned Jonas against defending the city's blight. It was signed with a symbol Eliza recognized with a jolt of terror. A broken feather, the mark of Elias Vance, a bitter, disgraced tracker from a nearby settlement, known for his cunning and his deep-seated hatred for anyone who dared to live outside the established order. Vance, a man Jonas had once outsmarted in a trapping dispute years ago, had resurfaced, now allied with Croft, driven by his own festering resentment. The threat was not singular. It was a layered, insidious attack from multiple angles, an alliance of greed and old grudges. The realization hit Eliza with the force of a physical blow. Vance knew of the Mountain Clan, of her lineage. He knew the significance of the wolf symbol. His involvement wasn't just about reclaiming her for Croft. It was a personal vendetta against Jonas, using her as the primary weapon. This was not a simple rescue. It was a trap, meticulously laid. As the sounds of men and horses grew louder, echoing up the valley, Eliza made a decision. Jonas, though healing, was still vulnerable. Their home, fortified as it was, could not withstand a sustained siege. She had to protect him, just as he had protected her. She would turn herself in, negotiate, buy time for Jonas to escape or prepare a counterattack. As the sun began to dip below the western peaks, casting long, purple shadows, Eliza looked at Jonas, her eyes filled with a resolute, agonizing love. She spoke softly, her voice steady despite the tremor in her heart. She told him she would go to them, that she would offer herself to save him, to buy them a chance. She would surrender, she insisted, to the wolves at their door. It was a sacrifice, a desperate gambit to protect their nascent family, their fragile haven. With that quiet, terrifying declaration, she took a step towards the door, ready to face the encroaching darkness, ready to give up everything for the life they had forged. The air outside the cabin was thick with the scent of pine and the metallic tang of fear. Yet Eliza stepped out, her chin held high, towards the encroaching darkness. But before she could fully cross the threshold, Jonas's hand, strong and unyielding, gripped her arm. His eyes, though still carrying the pain of his injury, blazed with a fierce protectiveness. He would not allow her to sacrifice herself. Their bond was not one of ownership, but of partnership, and he would face this threat with her, not send her into it alone. The confrontation began not with a roar, but with a chilling silence. Silas Croft, a grim smile on his face, emerged from the tree line, flanked by a dozen heavily armed men, Elias Vance, a shadowy figure at his side. Croft's voice, when he spoke, was a mocking drawl, full of triumph. He had come for his property, he declared, for the woman who had defied him. He saw Jonas as a mere obstacle, a wild man who had dared to stand against his will. But Jonas Grimm was no mere wild man. He was a master of this unforgiving terrain, a phantom woven into the very fabric of the mountains. He had spent days preparing, not for a direct confrontation of brute force, but for a battle of wits, a dance with the landscape itself. As Croft's men advanced, their boots crunching on the frozen earth, Jonas did not move to meet them. Instead, he simply raised his hand, pointing to a barely visible tripwire, a slender thread of sinew stretched between two ancient spruces. One of Croft's men, bolder than the rest, scoffed and stepped forward, only to trigger a hidden mechanism. A volley of stones and branches carefully positioned rained down from the canopy above, disorienting and scattering the advance party. It was not a lethal trap, but a demonstration, a chilling warning of what awaited them. Croft roared in frustration, ordering his men to surround the cabin, to smoke them out. But Jonas had anticipated this. As the men cautiously moved through the dense forest seeking cover, they found themselves walking into a labyrinth of hidden snares and cunningly disguised pitfalls. The mountain man had turned his home into an extension of his own wild mind, each tree, each rock, a potential ally. Screams of pain echoed through the woods as several men stumbled into nets or found their legs caught in clever, non-lethal traps that held them fast. Elias Vance, ever the tracker, seemed to sense the unseen dangers, his movements more cautious, his eyes constantly scanning. Croft, enraged by the unexpected resistance, ordered a direct assault. He wanted Eliza, and he was tired of games. But as his men began to hack their way through the final screen of trees towards the cabin, a low, guttural growl echoed from the shadows, not human, but something ancient and powerful. From the deeper woods, emerging like specters, came three large, shaggy figures. Wolves. They were not attacking, but circling, their eyes glowing in the fading light, their presence a silent, terrifying deterrent. Jonas had not merely lived in the wilderness, he had earned its respect. These were the same wolves whose pups Eliza had helped him save from a collapsing den weeks earlier. Their mother a silent, watchful ally. Elias Vance, recognizing the gravity of the situation, saw the look in Jonas's eyes, not of hatred, but of a quiet, lethal resolve. He knew the mountain could not be conquered, only appeased. He looked at Croft, who still bellowed orders, oblivious to the true nature of the battle. Vance knew this was a losing fight, a fool's errand. He had seen the mountain man's traps, felt the forest come alive against them. He had underestimated Jonas, just as Croft had. In a surprising act of self-preservation, and perhaps a flicker of grudging respect for the wild, Vance turned to Croft. His voice, for once devoid of malice, was clear and cold. He declared the fight was over, that Croft was outmatched, outsmarted, and outnumbered by the mountain itself. Vance refused to continue, his allegiance to survival overriding his lingering resentment. Croft, momentarily stunned by Vance's defection and the ominous presence of the wolves, was caught off guard. He stood exposed, his rage giving way to a sudden, chilling fear. It was then that Eliza, who had stood steadfast beside Jonas, spoke. Her voice, though quiet, cut through the tension with the clarity of mountain air. She revealed a truth, a legal loophole Croft had overlooked. The debt had been paid not by a forced marriage contract, but by a legal agreement, signed and witnessed, that a new debtor would fulfill the obligation. Jonas had not stolen her. He had simply offered a new binding contract, witnessed by the old justice of the mountains. His payment of eternity had not been abstract at all. It was a promise of loyalty, of care, of a life lived outside the reach of Croft's avarice, a bond recognized by a forgotten law he had found in an old ledger. A legal truth, meticulously researched by Jonas from dusty ancient land deeds he had kept, that rendered Croft's claim null and void. Defeated by cunning, by the raw power of the wilderness, and by the unexpected twist of law, Silas Croft cursed, his face contorted in a mask of impotent fury. He was forced to retreat, his authority shattered, his men demoralized. The mountain had spoken, and it had chosen its champions. As Croft and his diminished party vanished into the twilight, beaten but not entirely broken, a single, lingering threat remained. Elias Vance, as he disappeared into the darkness, cast one last, lingering glance at the cabin. There was no anger, no promise of future revenge, only a calculating stare, a recognition of defeat, but also an unspoken understanding that the mountain held secrets and some debts once acknowledged were never truly forgotten. The defeat was resounding, but the landscape remained a dangerous place, and some men, like the shadows they cast, were simply biding their time. A year had passed since the snows had melted, carrying with them the last vestiges of Silas Croft's defeated ambition. The mountain, once a silent witness to their struggles, now embraced Jonas and Eliza with its vast, enduring peace. The cabin, once a simple refuge, had blossomed into a true home, radiating warmth and the quiet hum of shared life. One crisp autumn morning, the air filled with the scent of wood smoke and damp earth, Eliza stood by the hearth, her silhouette softened by the gentle curve of her advanced pregnancy. Her hands, no longer raw from hard labor but still strong, moved with a newfound grace as she stirred a pot of simmering stew. Jonas sat by the window, carving a small wooden wolf, its smooth lines echoing the one on her locket. His gaze, once distant and guarded, now rested on her with an open tenderness, a quiet contentment that spoke volumes of his healed heart. The raw, jagged wounds of his past had finally found their balm in her presence, in the life they had painstakingly built together. The cabin was alive with small touches of domesticity that Eliza had woven into its very fabric. Freshly picked wildflowers adorned a rough-hewn table, a colorful quilt draped over the sleeping furs, and the scent of baking bread often mingled with the pine and smoke. Jonas was no longer alone. His silent world was now filled with the gentle rhythm of Eliza's breathing, the soft cadence of her humming, the promise of new life. He would often find himself watching her, a quiet awe in his eyes, marveling at the transformation she had brought to his solitary existence. The sanctuary had truly become a home, a living testament to their enduring partnership. The final revelation, however, lay not in the physical transformation of their lives, but in the echoes of the past that now clarified their future. One evening, as the first snowflakes of winter began to fall, Eliza uncovered an old, leather-bound journal tucked away in a hidden compartment of Jonas's ancient desk. It was filled with elegant script, not his, but that of an ancestor, detailing not only the layout of the valley but also fragmented tales of a forgotten clan, the people who had long guarded this very mountain. Among the faded entries, she found drawings of the wolf moon symbol, identical to the one on her locket, but beneath it, another detail. A small, distinctive notch on the left ear of the wolf, a mark that was a unique identifier of her mother's ancestral line. It was indisputable. Her lineage was directly tied to the ancient guardians of this mountain, the very clan that Jonas's own family, generations ago, had once shared a tentative peace with, a kinship that had been lost to the tides of time and tragedy. The wolf moon was not just a symbol of protection, but a birthright, linking her to this land in a profound and undeniable way. Her arrival, therefore, was not merely a twist of fate, but the inevitable return of a lost descendant, guided by the very spirit of the mountain itself. The eternity Jonas had promised was not just a lifetime together, but an unbroken chain of legacy, a renewal of an ancient covenant between man, woman, and the land. Their love, born of desperation and forged in adversity, was not just a personal triumph, but a continuation of a story that had been waiting for them to complete. As the child within Eliza stirred, a gentle kick against her hand, the true essence of their journey settled into her heart. It was a journey that whispered of the quiet strength, found not in grand battles, but in the small, unwavering acts of courage. It spoke of family, not as a birthright, but as a bond forged in shared hardship and unwavering loyalty, a chosen sanctuary built with love and resilience. And it declared, with the silent majesty of the mountain peaks, that home was not merely a place of shelter, but a profound feeling of belonging, of safety, and of an eternal unyielding promise. The dawn of a new day saw the light spill over the highest peaks, illuminating the cabin, a beacon of hope and a testament to the enduring power of two souls who found their true selves and their eternity in the heart of the wild. Did you enjoy this journey? Tell us from what corner of the world you're watching this story from. Leave your comment, and to make sure you don't miss the next adventure, subscribe to the channel.